Now, this week, China imposed sanctions on 10 UK organisations and individuals for spreading what it calls lies and disinformation about human rights abuses. Now, the sanctions hit 5 Conservative MPs, including the former Minister, Nusrat Ghani, who joins us now. What happened?
Well, it's a curious state of affairs, Sophie. A number of us were sanctioned, and I think that Chinese Communist Party thought that they were intimidating us or were going to stop us talking about gross human rights abuses, particularly in Xinjiang. But it's been a complete misstep by the Chinese Communist Party. It's done a couple of things instead. It's actually made Parliament come together and say we won't have democratically elected officials intimidated anyway. It's also, Sophie, given us an opportunity to talk about the one thing the Chinese Communist Party do not want us to talk about, which is the gross human rights abuses against the Uyghur people and the fact that a genocide has been called out against China on the way that they're treating the Uyghur people by many countries around the world.
You, of course, have spoken out very strongly about some of those human rights abuses. I just wonder if you feel that the UK government has been tough enough in its dealings with China. If you look at, for example, the Integrated Defence Review published a couple of weeks ago, it calls for a positive trade and investment relationship with China. You know, given the treatment of the Uyghurs, given the situation in Hong Kong, given the fact this is a country that has sanctioned British MPs, is that really good enough?
Well, we must remember that these sanctions are in retaliation for the UK government sanctioning Chinese officials who have been implicated in the gross human rights abuses. So the UK government is definitely in the right direction. We would ask, many of us colleagues will ask that the UK government goes even further and sanctions even more Chinese officials who are involved in the abuses in Xinjiang. And what's also come about because of the sanctions, Sophie, a greater discussion about where we stand in the new global order if the Chinese Communist Party is going to be using both its financial power through its Belt and Road Initiative and also using these so-called sanctions to try and silence individuals like myself. I think these sanctions are a turning point in how we consider our long-term relationship with China, but not just us individually, just the UK, but also working with our partners, countries like America, for example. I think this is a moment that I don't expect the Chinese Communist Party wanted to come about because of the sanctions, but we now have an opportunity to think about, are we going to assert our values and how we're going to do that?
Now, Boris Johnson hosted the MPs who've been sanctioned yesterday in Downing Street. Couldn't help but notice that Tom Tugendhat wasn't there, the chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, who also was sanctioned. He tweeted to say he wasn't invited. Do you know what happened?
The meeting was organised very quickly at the last minute because the sanctions came about overnight on Thursday. We were made aware of them on Friday, and the meeting came about very quickly on Saturday. But look, all of us colleagues were sanctioned for doing what we've been elected to do.
So was he invited? Do you know?
We were all invited at very last minute, Sophie. But what's critical here is that we met with the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister standing side by side with us, which I don't think was the outcome the Chinese Communist Party thought they were going to achieve with the sanctions. I assume they thought that we would be marginalised by our party and that we will then feel intimidated in talking about the abuse of the Uyghur. But that definitely is not what has happened.
Just feels a bit strange, you know, that he tweeted to say he wasn't invited, he wasn't there. He's obviously one of the most high-profile critics of China and the Uyghurs. You know, it'd be pretty bad look, obviously, for the Prime Minister to be speaking up for free speech, but not inviting Tom Tugendhat, perhaps because of things that he said. But for the best of your knowledge, that's not the case. He was invited.
People were invited at very last minute. I mean, another parliamentary colleague was in Leicestershire, wasn't able to get down in time. But the story here, Sophie, is that we are not going to be intimidated. We're continuing to speak about the abuse of the Uyghur, and we now have an even closer relationship with the officials in our government, whether it's with the Prime Minister or whether it's the Foreign Secretary, who are going to be even more vocal because of the meeting that took place yesterday and the statements the Foreign Secretary made. So whatever outcome the Chinese Communist Party thought they were going to achieve with sanctioning elected officials, that definitely hasn't happened. And all we've been able to do is talk about the abuse of the Uyghur. And if I have a moment, Sophie, it's talking about 2 million people that are in prison camps in Xinjiang, and it is an issue for us because they are forced into labour and those products eventually end up on our shelves here in the UK.
Yeah, a really important point to get across, and it's pretty clear from speaking to you that the sanctions are not going to silence you if that is the aim. Just very finally, while I have you, we're talking about the roadmap out of lockdown. The government asked Parliament to extend the emergency COVID restrictions for another 6 months earlier this week, and you abstained in that vote. Why did you abstain?
Well, we know that the roadmap concludes towards the end of June, and the government's doing a fantastic job on that. But there was a particular issue within the legislation, which is that the powers were to extend up to October, which is 3 months beyond the roadmap. And I just felt that that was unnecessary. There is every opportunity for parliamentarians to come back to the House and for the executive to put forward their position and for that debate to take place. We know that the roadmap will conclude in a couple of months' time. Of course, the government needs flexibility, but I just thought it was unnecessary for those rules and regulations, those powers that exist elsewhere in other bits of legislation, to be in position for 3 months beyond the roadmap. But look, in Sussex, we've had 1 million people vaccinated. So I'm just really pleased that the vaccination programme is going incredibly well. And we're getting towards the end of this COVID lockdown, and we'll be out of it by the end of June.
Yeah, you can meet up with 5 other people outside from tomorrow.
It'll be
Incredible.
exciting.
Very exciting news. Nusrat Ghani, thank you very much for being on the programme today. Thank you.
Thank you.